Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Let's make our way to our seats and get started. The quicker we get started, the quicker you get barbecued.
How are you?
So it's really good to be here. We used to do these on an annual basis, and then COVID happened, and your world and our world got really weird. Actually, we thought, as we dove into COVID, we were already kind of advanced and had the abilities to work from home and do video meetings and those type things because our basin is so large, and we really thought that, wow, this is going to save us money and gas, and it's really cool to be able to do these virtual meetings. But it didn't take long to realize we were really missing out on relationships and the face-to-face conversations, and it is, I'm sure you all are feeling the same thing. It's great to get back on the road and be with the folks that do what you do. We did this yesterday up in Cleburne. We're doing this obviously here now. We have our lower basin meeting in the morning in Brenham. We're going to go through a lot of stuff, talk about ultimately our water rates. We're going to talk about a lot of water planning that's happening, really focused in on Bell and Williamson County right now. We're going to talk about water supply. Aaron's going to tell you how bad it's not, but how bad it could be. So he's going to talk a little bit about comparing this to 2011, 2012, the similarities and the differences. The one thing that stands out to me about 2011 and 2012, it ended. And everybody that screamed the property values were being destroyed and all those type things, it didn't come to fruition. But that doesn't take away from the severity of the drought. And drought is the most unique of natural disasters. You never really know when it begins. So it's hard to plan for it until you get into the middle of the throes of the drought and begin to understand the impact. And we're going to say things today kind of downplaying a little bit how severe the drought is. Obviously, if you're here and you're a farmer, you don't feel that. So, it's from really from a water supply standpoint. A couple of things I want to bring to your attention before we jump into the presentations. First of all, most of you are going to see an invite from us. Most of you that are water customers of the BRA are going to see an invite from us for a round of meetings that we're going to host for specifically Williamson, Bell, and McLennan County. And if we need to reach out to you guys and do that in your neck of the woods, we need to do that. And really what it's going to be focused on is how water users in these regions really get tuned into the Region G water planning process. Because what we're going to see in 4.5 years with this next round of water planning reports is that we woefully underplanned in the last 5-year period. And that's nobody's fault other than the fact that now we're starting to see along 130 and the I-35 corridor, even north of Waco, we're starting to see the industries come in with very large water demands. So we want to bring you by county to the table, let the Region G water planning team walk you through the last round of reports and how to work with them to make sure that in about 2 years, when the new population projections and water demands come out, your numbers and the county those are all captured in those reports. So for a lot of reasons, for planning, for funding, for different types of things that you're captured. So that's really important. And then also, starting in July, Aaron, where's Aaron? Aaron, you'll hear more from Aaron in a minute. But starting in July, we're going to have videos every 2 weeks giving really detailed, specific drought updates. We're still working out the details. I don't know if they'll be live where you get to ask questions, or most likely we're thinking they're going to be a 10 to 15 minute video where Aaron's going to update the information that he's going to show you today and talk you through our release strategies and how much water is being released and and all these different type things. But if that interests you, that'll be something that'll be on our web. We'll be publicizing that through Facebook and all of our different social media stuff. So stay tuned for that. I do want to introduce some VIPs here today, some elected officials. We have Renee Flores as a city council member for the city of Round Rock. Matt Baker is also here with the city of Round Rock. Thank you guys for another visit. Also, Judge David Blackburn from Bell County is here with us. Yes, we know you very busy, and we appreciate you being here. And then also the Brazos River Authority, we're governed by board members that are appointed by the governor. And we have two of our board members here. Dr. Judy Crone is here. And our presiding officer, Cynthia Flores, is here. So thank y'all for being here. So with that, let's go ahead and start our agenda. That way we can get to barbecue. And I keep saying that because somebody said they were only here for the barbecue. So I'm not going to just close that.
Make sure we get technology to work here. All right. So this morning I want to talk a little bit about our integrated water resource plan project. This is a project we kicked off last fall, and we're really excited about it and what we expect to get out of it. As I look around the room, there's quite a few of you who are already involved in our stakeholder efforts in that. So some of it may be a little bit of rehash, but towards the end you'll get to a little bit more new material. First up, to kind of help you understand what it is, you can define integrated water resource planning in an abundance of ways, but really for the BRA it boils down to answering two questions for us. What else do we need to do beyond the current planning processes to help meet the demands that are coming? And then also what's next? So once we have all of these projects lined up, how do we build our priority and ranking to help implement them when the needs come? It's kind of that if then what statement that we're looking for. So a couple of concepts when you think about integrated water resource planning to delve into is number one, it's integrated. We take a holistic look at all the resources within the watershed or basin and look at making diversified portfolios, taking advantage of regional opportunities where we can build that synergy. Also, we look at reliability. And the best way to do that is to account for risk and uncertainty in our planning models. So we build that into these very complex models that we're going to be developing as part of this project. Another key item is resiliency, and that has to do with recovering from times of shortage, recovering from stressors, and just really ensuring continuity of service, which is an important metric to us. And finally, you'll see sustainability, and that has to do with renewable water supplies, looking at long-range impacts of the projects we're developing and how to make sure that we understand what those impacts are. And again, it all kind of dovetails into this adaptive planning model so that we can make decisions as conditions change. When we initially started talking about doing the integrated water resource plan, we thought we were going to take on the whole basin as one at first. And as we started down the path of developing the scope of work and looking at what needed to happen, it became very clear that the Little River watershed was an area that needed immediate attention. So we kind of pivoted, put all of our focus on really studying this area and help us, because it will help us in project planning for some of the near-term decisions that have to be made to support the needs that are coming in this area. And it'll also help our customers in this area understand where we're going. So again, not to restate it, but it evaluates water supplies, demands, and water management strategies in a way that considers risk, develops a prioritization framework, and all the other factors. There's multiple other drivers that can impact what our portfolios ultimately look like. Population growth, we're certainly witnessing that, industrial growth. We want to consider changes in irrigated acreage, effectiveness of conservation measures, how much that actually ends up impacting the demands. And then also climate factors. We're dealing with some of that now probably. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this as our focus. We're pretty far down the road in it. We're a little over a third of the way completed with it. But the good news is once this project gets completed for just the Little River Basin, we'll take that information and then roll that up into our next phase, which will include the whole Brazos River Basin. So this is where we get to what have we done and kind of where we're going. It's a very complex process, and this slide doesn't nearly do it justice, but task one, we are completing, and we'll have that completed at the end of next week. And that's really just developing the kind of the basis for our planning efforts. That's going through and evaluating the risks and uncertainties that we're concerned about and that we want to include in our modeling, looking at our metrics and reliability goals that we want the outputs to fall within, looking at our future water demands, and that's where we've come to a lot of these stakeholders and asked for input. And a lot of times that input has changed monthly, if not weekly sometimes. So we appreciate your efforts to keep us informed. Also, there's been a heavy lift on developing the actual modeling system where we plug all this great information into. And that is, again, steps 1 through 4 at the bottom. That's what we've completed. Started next week, we'll initiate task 2. And that will get into what I consider the more fun part of the study, where we'll actually be doing the vulnerability analysis. We'll be looking at water management strategies to plug into this model and see what it looks like on the backside of it. We'll also be coming to our stakeholder group asking you, what ideas do you have, or what strategies have you considered, or what would you like considered that we could plug into the model. From all that, when we get past going through the evaluation and we determine that yes, these are viable strategies or they're not, we'll put them into portfolios, and then those portfolios will be evaluated. And kind of how that looks is if we were looking at a timeline and in 2035 these demand factors were met, but also these climate conditions were met, and then other risk and uncertainty were plugged into it, then it would tell us which portfolio to look at, which book of projects to pull out and BRA go forth and conquer with these projects. So in a very succinct way, it's a very complex process. There's a lot of ins and outs to it, but that's where we are currently. We're excited about the progress and what we've already learned about ourselves as we've gone through it. And certainly looking forward to any engagement that we'll have with stakeholders and others as we go forward. We anticipate having this completed in the fall of 2023. The other thing I want to mention today, we won't spend a lot of time on it, but it's kind of a parallel project and it specifically impacts this area of our basin.
You're under a non-disclosure agreement, I guess you can't talk about
I guess that did it. Non-disclosure agreement, I can't talk to you about it. So, let me see. We'll give them just a minute here. Last fall, we issued a request for competitive seal proposal to look for additional water supplies to help meet some of the coming demands in this area. And good. So we received those responses back earlier this spring. We've gone through our internal evaluation process to look at what that was. And in our proposal, we didn't limit it. We didn't tell them what type of project we were looking for. We just gave them, some targets to hit. We were looking for a certain amount of water by a certain time and then a delivery schedule thereafter. So we received 2 proposals for that. And after evaluating both proposals, we've settled on negotiating with Recharge Water. And they have a large project that taps into the Simsboro aquifer. It's a formation in the Simsboro, Carrizo-Wilcox. And like David alluded to, we are under a non-disclosure agreement, so there's limited information I can provide. But ultimately, that project, the way we envision it, would provide an additional 45,000 acre-feet for use in the Central Basin. More than likely, it'll be more than that by the time it's all said and done, but for our initial stages of it, that's kind of where it's landed. David, anything else you want me to touch on that one? So that's another one you'll see more information coming on in the coming months, weeks and months, and we'll keep you as in tune as we can. Any questions or anything on that? We'll turn it over to Brad.
Good morning, everybody. I know many of y'all have heard us talking about Allen's Creek Reservoir at past meetings and presentations we've given through the years, but we've had some really substantial developments on the project here over the last couple of months, and so we're really excited about finally being able to move the project forward and get started on a major new reservoir. Just real quickly, this map shows kind of where it's located. You can see on the left, it's kind of zoomed out there, and on the right is the zoomed in version of the project. It's located between Sealy and Wallace, about 25 miles west of Sugar Land. And on the right side, you can see there the yellow outline outlines the footprint of the reservoir. It kind of shows what it's going to look like. And you can see that it's not directly on the river. It's going to be an off-channel reservoir, so the dam, which is on that right side of the yellow line there on the right, will be built just off of the Brazos River on Allen's Creek, which is a tributary down there that drains into the river. So it won't actually dam up the Brazos River, but the Brazos River will provide the source of supply for the project. So the concept of the design is we'll pump water out of the Brazos River into the reservoir whenever the river is flowing good, so that we've got water stored down there when we get into situations like we're in this year right now. Aaron's going to talk more about our releases right now. We've been releasing water to our lower basin customers now for several weeks, and that will continue until we get some rain and flows improved. But if we had this reservoir located down there today, those releases that we're making today would be coming from this reservoir as opposed to some of the reservoirs further upstream. This is just a map of our basin and our system, and I just wanted to show this to kind of highlight the key location of Allen's Creek Reservoir. Again, it's very close to the lower basin where our substantial customers are. We can deliver water in that part of the basin much more efficiently and quickly from that reservoir than we can from the ones further upstream. John just talked about the Little River watershed. I know we've got folks here from up in the Hill County area around Lake Aquila and Lake Whitney, and we're just seeing a tremendous amount of growth along I-35. Everybody needs water, and ultimately those reservoirs that are further upstream are going to need to be dedicated solely to those areas as that growth materializes. So this reservoir will benefit our system by allowing us to have a source down in the lower basin to take care of those customers and leave more of the water up in this part of the basin at home for the local growth that's occurring around here. So this just shows some of the statistics or numbers associated with the reservoir. It's going to hold about 145,000 acre-feet of water when it's full. That's the capacity. An acre-foot is about 1 foot of water over a football field. That's 1 acre-foot. It's going to cover about 7,000 acres, maybe a little bit over 7,000 acres. The diversion rate that we're permitted to take water out of the river is about 2,200 cubic feet per second. That's a big number, but relative to flows in the Brazos, when we're having floods down there are on the order of 100,000 cubic feet per second. So flood-wise, it's not a big number. Water supply-wise, that's a big diversion. It's going to require some big infrastructure in the river. And annually, it's going to provide a reliable supply of about 100,000 acre-feet of water per year for our customers down there. You can see there's a couple of different intake locations that are shown here on the map, and those locations are both included in the water right permit that we have for the project. As most of y'all know, or many of you know if you've looked at maps or looked out the window of an airplane, rivers change over time. They move around and they form what's called oxbows, and they basically change the flow path. And so I think that's something that we're going to have to really evaluate closely, is which one of these intake locations are we going to put the structure in. That'll be a key point in the engineering work that goes in initially. You can see the concern is if I can get this, well, there you go. Right here, the concern is at some point the river's going to cut this off. And so if that happens, is that a good intake location? And you would think right off the top of your head, probably not, but there may be an engineering solution to where, water still backs up in that oxbow, and, that's a viable location. But that's something that we're going to have to take a close look at and see as we start moving forward. Another thing that's really unique about this reservoir is you can see how close the dam is going to be to the river. And so most dams just have water behind them in the reservoir. This dam is going to be built in the floodplain of the river, and so it's going to have to be designed to have water on both sides of it. Whenever the river is up, it's going to be out of banks and it will be against the face of the dam. So that's another interesting nuance associated with this project that you don't typically see. So we've talked for years that we've been partners in this project with Houston. Back in 1999, the legislature passed a bill that ultimately resulted in the water right permit for this project being issued to BRA in the city of Houston, and it established the ownership percentages in the project. BRA was the minority owner at 30%, Houston was the majority owner at 70%. We've been working with them pretty diligently for the last 10 or 15 years or so, trying to negotiate a way that we could move this project forward, because we know we need the water in our basin. We would like to have that reservoir down there today. So in our minds, we want to get it as quick as we can, but Houston was in a little different position, and they didn't need it as quickly as we did, and so that created some conflicts in terms of getting it going and paying for things. And so we negotiated for years. We get to 2019, and in 2019, the legislature passed a bill that was going to force Houston to sell their interest in the project to the BRA. So we were going to become the sole owner and move forward, which is what we want. Houston challenged that bill. They filed a lawsuit against BRA in the state of Texas, basically alleging that the bill was unconstitutional. So we've been in litigation for the last 3 years or so. Started out at a district court level, ultimately went up to an appeals court, and here for the last year or so it's been at the Supreme Court. But all the while we've been negotiating with the city to try to find an arrangement where we could, mutually resolve our differences without the Supreme Court deciding one way or the other, because both sides have a lot to lose if that decision went one way or the other. And so this is the big development. In May of this year, we reached a settlement agreement with Houston, and this slide kind of summarizes some of the major points of that settlement. We're in 100% control now moving forward. Houston is kind of out of the picture completely. They did maintain a right to purchase 30,000 acre-feet of water from us in the future, and so the way that'll work is once the reservoir gets built, they'll have a 1-year period where we'll offer them the option to purchase their water. It'll be the same contract as all of you have with us, so it's not going to be any kind of a special deal. They'll buy water under our standard contract form at the system rate, just like everybody else, if they choose to. They may choose at that point not to exercise that right, and then we'll have a little more water available for our basin. So the settlement supersedes all the prior agreements that we had in place. It resolved the litigation, so the case that was on appeal at the Texas Supreme Court is resolved at this point. And one of the other things that we did as a part of the buyout was we had about $20 million of outstanding debt that we had borrowed from the Texas Water Development Board back when we got involved with the project with Houston. And so Houston was responsible for 70% of that debt. We were responsible for 30%. And the smoothest part of this process was for us to just go ahead and pay that debt off. And so the BRA paid off the Water Development Board debt as a part of our deal with Houston here last month. And so looking ahead, we're in the process of finalizing a professional services agreement with Stantec. They're an engineering company that specializes in a lot of big projects, but they've got a lot of history in reservoir construction. They're going to be doing the design work, all the engineering design work, and also the environmental permitting work for the project. We're going to begin that environmental permitting later this year. It's going to be a really complex process to get the 404 permit. Some of you may have some experience with those, but there are a lot of factors that we're going to have to look at. Environmentally, cultural resources, flood impacts, aquatic resources, endangered species. It's just a long list of things. And it's a pretty complicated process. We're estimating 4 to 7 years to get that process completed. Honestly, there's nobody that can tell you how long it's going to take. That's what we're estimating. There have been a couple of reservoir projects done in the state here over the last 5 or 10 years where they've issued permits. Their timeframes have been a little bit longer than this. We're hoping that we can learn from them and our process may go a little bit quicker. So once we get the environmental permitting work done, then we'll be looking at final design on the project, final engineering design and construction, and that's probably another 4 to 7 years once the permit's issued. So if you look at all that from a real high level, if we're able to be moving dirt in 2030 or shortly thereafter, that will be a good thing. And hopefully, if everything goes well, we'll have a reservoir down there by around 2035. So that's kind of where we are on that. Again, that's a big deal for us that we've been working at a long time, and it's going to be a big new source of water for our basin that's going to help everybody in the basin.
Come on up, Aaron. A couple of things. First of all, I don't have a crystal ball, but if I did, I would make you a bet that Houston's never going to take that water. We looked at the engineering of Houston taking that water, and it's getting closer to being $1 billion for them to tie in and pump that water to the east. And I tell you that because Houston, of a lot of cities, has done a masterful job in planning for its water futures, but it all went east where the water is and not west. So even if Houston does exercise that right and buys 30,000 acre foot, they'll be paying for it the same rate that, as Brad said, that our other system customers. But it's likely that they would, if they exercise that right, would sell it downstream to customers in the basin, so it would fit the same need. As far as the IRP goes, I want to foot stomp something. In a perfect world, we would have waited for the IRP to play out and have a Bible, if you will, of recommendations on what to do for the next water supply. But we don't have that luxury. We knew that groundwater was needed in Williamson County to help both Williamson County and Bell County. But from all of the state water planning projections, we thought it was closer to 2040 to 2035. And with the growth that we've been seeing, it is so fast now that our march forward is to develop the groundwater and start using it, not develop the groundwater and reserve it and wait until we need it. The infrastructure has to be built now, the water has to be secured now, and the water is needed for some of you within years to come, not decades to come. So the playing field has changed, and the development of the groundwater is our #1 priority. Our board's committed to it, our management is committed to it. We've started negotiations, and I don't mean just talking about, hey, where are we going to meet? We've had meetings, we've got another big meeting in Waco on Friday. So the negotiations are happening. We want the water secured in the next 6 to 9 months, so that I know that the county is talking about infrastructure to go get the water, so that everybody can start making plans on how you're going to build and come get the water and use the water. So it's very much a priority. Also, the IRP is not the state water planning process. I want you to think of our planning process as the state water plan on steroids, where the state water plan, and it's critically important that you're a part of that, is going to look at water use and water projections at the 30,000 foot. We're looking into how people are going to share water, how infrastructure is going to be built, the timing of such infrastructures, not only the groundwater, but how the groundwater is going to be commingled with surface water, and all of that strategy and how it's going to play out over time. So it's a multi-year process, but we don't have time to wait on the delivery of the groundwater. So just FYI.
Hopefully you can hear me with this mic. So as David mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about the water supply update, how the system is responding to this drought, how we got to where we are now as far as the system as it is now, how the drought is evolving, and then current status of the system, and looking ahead of what may happen over the next several months. And every time we have a customer meeting, it seems like we're either talking about really wet times, floods or drought, and there's really no in between. So last summer, coming out of the summer, we really had a really wet period, and our reservoirs in the system and stream flow doing really, really well. And we were thankful for that, because as you'll see now, we've seen some departure from normal rainfall, and that has impacted stream flow and impacted our inflows into the reservoir. We have to have inflows to refill our reservoirs. So we did look at the statistics a little bit. Right now, between January and the end of May, we're at the 4th lowest total inflows as a system in the last, since 1994. So 2011 is up there, #1, but on average, we see about 1.08 million acre feet flow into all 11 reservoirs, and we've only seen about 156,000 acre feet over the last 5 months. So we're not 2011 type drought, but we're trending in that direction as we move through the summer. So we'll talk a little bit about the drought and how it evolves. We post the U.S. Drought Monitor and our reservoir status on our website every Thursday. So this large graphic, I guess on the right, is as of last Thursday, so June 16th. And I wanted to show over the since early August of 2021 where the drought monitor has been. And the drought monitor, and you'll see obviously the legend equating to each reservoir and the percent full at each reservoir over the system at each of these 3 time periods. So in early August, and it's kind of rare, but in Texas, to not see much drought intensity in early August of 2021, that was kind of a rare thing. And most of our reservoirs were either full or in the core reservoirs, they were impounding floodwater. So the stream flow was doing well. In the lower left, you'll see October 7th of 2021, and you'll see some increasing drought intensities in the lower left, and you see the yellows and the tans. And so I want to focus on, we have farmers, folks in the Proctor area in this part of the basin. They utilize water from Proctor for their irrigation, and we did see some increasing departures from normal, and starting in the fall, and then kind of increasing through the first part of 2022, and really over the last several months. So you see some extreme drought and exceptional drought, primarily upstream of the I-35 corridor. So really from this point, upstream of Georgetown and Stillhouse and Lake Belton, and all the way up to Proctor. And so you're starting to see some of these exceptional drought impacts as far as the agricultural impacts. So you have an agricultural drought, and you really, as the drought progresses, you see departure from normal soil moisture, and then you start to see declining stream flow and then reservoir drawdown. So, really the agricultural standpoint, they're really seeing some impacts. So I spoke a little bit about departure from normal precipitation. I wanted to kind of drive home the fact that, so why are we seeing what we're seeing? This is a graphic from the National Weather Service, and it shows basically the departure from normal precipitation. So from October 1st of 2021 to this point, so 8.5 months. And so you know about how much you're gonna average as far as rainfall from October to now. And this is what we received less than normal. And on the right, you'll see the legend, and you see these tans and reds that are kind of along I-35 and then upstream towards the Proctor area, and then the Gatesville area in Coryell County. Those areas have received anywhere between 12 and 16 inches less rain than normal over the last 8.5 months. And that's, obviously, a lot of folks will hear about La Nina, and some of the longer term projections. La Nina does impact our weather in Texas and the southern tier of the U.S., and it essentially causes the storm track to move further to the north, and we miss those rain chances, and that's what has happened. So that we have going forward, it does look like La Nina will continue at least until the fall, and hopefully it'll transition back to more neutral. We'll start to see rain in the fall and going into next year. So this is a graphic that we post every Wednesday, and it's we call it our stovepipe diagram, and it represents each reservoir and the storage within each reservoir and then empty storage. So the height of the columns represents the actual amount, or what each reservoir could store, and it's representative of the system. So you can see Possum Kingdom, Whitney, and Belton are our three largest reservoirs. I will point out at Whitney, we only have 50,000 acre feet of authorized storage. We contract with the Corps of Engineers to store that water, and we have water rights with TCEQ to use that water. Right now, we are in most of the reservoirs outside of Lake Granger. We did enter into stage 1 drought watch in mid-March. We have to maintain a drought contingency plan required by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. Essentially, a drought contingency plan allows water right holders or reservoir owners a plan to extend the supply through drought. So you'll see as we have more drawdown, we'll have different stages and we'll require different things. The stage 1 drought watch, we want 5% less water use than what would have occurred without drought contingency measures. And we entered into the stage 1 drought watch through an early drought warning trigger called the Palmer Hydrologic Drought Index. So it wasn't tied to reservoir storage, it was really tied towards groundwater levels. departure from normal rainfall, and it's kind of an early indicator of when we may start to see water supply impacts to a drought. So we were out ahead of the drought, so to speak, in March. Our system was doing well, but we wanted to get out ahead of it and kind of raise that warning. So you'll see the yellow represents each of the reservoirs in stage 1 drought watch. The percent full is the amount of water that's held relative to the capacity of each reservoir. So overall, as of last Wednesday, we were at 90% full. Today, I looked at the metrics this morning, we're about 89% full. So one of the things that is happening, and this happens, it's normal, but stream flow along the main stem of the river, downstream of the reservoir systems, declined to a point where our large lower basin customers like Dow Chemical, Gulf Coast Water Authority, and NRG cannot physically divert the water from the river. So in that circumstance, we have to release stored water for them under contract to get the water for them to keep operating and to mitigate any shortages in water. So right now we coordinate with the Water Master, and Molly and Nancy from the Water Master office is here. We coordinate with them almost on a daily basis on looking at what is needed in the downstream portion of the river system and making those, and we coordinate with the Corps of Engineers and the core reservoirs to release that water. So right now we're releasing about 750 cubic feet per second. So that's essentially about 1,500 acre feet a day from Lake Whitney, and that flows downstream to the Fort Bend and Brazoria County areas for the lower basin customers. Moving forward, I have other projections here that we post early on each month. So the first week of each month, we update our projections, and David mentioned some drought updates that we'll do on video that will basically update folks on, as the drought evolves, how we're going to operate the system to meet the demands of everybody. I mean, that's what the system is there for, is to meet the demands of both lakeside customers and our downstream customers. So this was issued early in June, so early this month, and it shows the projected reservoir status for the end of July. And you'll see all the reservoirs are either in stage 1 drought watch, and then Lake Proctor, we're anticipating that reservoir to go into stage 2 drought warning. That is we're requesting 10% reduction in water use at stage 2. And we're showing that the system total would be about 79% at that point. And we're not saying that this is going to happen, but it's a potentially it could happen based on minimum inflows and high evaporation. One of the things that the folks question is, okay, well, what's our largest user of water in our system? Well, I can tell you most years it's evaporation. And so, on average, a lot of the reservoirs can see half an inch of evaporation every day, and that accumulates. So, assuming high evaporation and minimum inflows, this is what we're seeing as far as the total system at the end of July. I will point out the drawdown. You'll see these drawdown values. This is the elevation, the change in elevation from the full elevation of each of the reservoirs. So, anywhere from, at Lake Georgetown, we're projecting potentially 10.6 feet below full at the end of July, and most of the other reservoirs, 8 feet or lower. So going forward, we'll continue to update these at the first week of each month, and potentially more frequently as we move through the drought. As far as the seasonal outlooks, I know a lot of folks look at these. This is the National Weather Service and NOAA. They produce longer-term outlooks on what the precipitation and temperature would be over the next several months. And so this was released last Thursday, June 16th, and it's valid for the period of basically mid-June through the end of September. Even in the absence of La Nina and what the Pacific sea surface temperatures are doing, it's summer in Texas. And typically in July and August, we don't get much rain. That's normal. And so a lot of this is climatological. And so, it's not surprising that we're going to see, the projections at least show below normal precipitation. This is the upper left graphic here. And then the lower left is seasonal temperature outlook over the next several months. So, showing above normal temperature. Compiling both precipitation and temperature, the National Weather Service produces this drought outlook, and you can see the dark brown, and then the tans, and then the greens, and the yellows either mean persistence of drought. Is the browns, the drought remains but improves. The tans, that's not going to happen in Texas. Obviously what happens in the west, the drought removal is likely due to the monsoon, but we are seeing drought development likely in the areas that aren't impacted by drought in Texas, and that's mainly due to the projected high precipitation and high temperature, below normal precipitation and high temperature outlook. So, hopefully La Nina will abate later this year, and we'll get to see some fall rains. I mean, our next rainy season obviously is October, but we are looking to the Gulf for maybe some relief. La Nina does tend to basically make the Atlantic hurricane season more active. And so, we're looking at that, but at least in the last several years, we've missed a lot of those tropical cyclones that have dropped some rain. But that's really what we're looking at over the next several months. And then, hopefully in October, we can receive our fall rains and help improve the system. So I think that's all I had.
Well, good morning. What I'd like to do is show you the presentation that I just did with the board back on May 23rd, and kind of walk through not only that and the calculation for the system rate. And we'll start off with that. And in the system rate, we start off with the O&M expenses for the water supply. It's $52 million. It's up about about $5 million, but most of that's dealing with salaries and benefits, as well as new hires that we have coming in, as well as the lake operations has some additional expenses. Next is the debt subject to coverage. That's East Williamson County, the water treatment plant near Taylor. And I'll talk a little bit more about the subject to coverage later on in the calculation. And then you have basically water that's not subject to coverage. And what we have left are the loans that we have with the Army Corps of Engineers for the water storage in their 8 core lakes. The decrease is what Brad talked about. We paid off Texas Water Development Board. They're $20 million on Allen's Creek. And then last is the operating projects. And those are assessments, they're studies, they're anything but not building out the major infrastructures in our basin, giving me a total of $61 million in total expenses. Next are the other incomes. And the first one is basically the non-system rate customers. And these are things like our 2-tier customers, where the customers pay one rate for the water used and a lower rate for the water not used. We also have utilities in there. These are the very old contracts, and the contracts dictate the amount of revenue we earn from that. The other income is basically from things like Sugar Land. We have a contract with them for our revenues, as well as East Williamson County. We do charge the customers there a system rate, or a rate that's set by the contract as well, giving you a total of $21 million of income. So let's talk a little bit about debt subject coverage. We have a ratio of 1.3. And that 1.3 is set not only by bond covenants that we have on East Williamson County, but our board also has set that rate. So what we need from our system rate holders is simply take the 61 million, subtract out the 21 million, and add back in the 761, and we need $40 million. So you then divide that by the system rate holders acre feet, and you get $85 an acre foot. Now, in the last 2 years, I've projected $88 an acre foot. And that $88 is what I've been modeling for the last few years to cover the additional expenses such as Allen's Creek and other projects we have. So I'll show you later in the 5-year plan, at FY24, I'm projecting $93. So instead of going from 85 to 93, I'm going to go from 88 to 93, which is it stays in the 5 to 6% range. So let's just take a look at some of the acre feet that we have under contract. We already talked a little bit about the system rate holders, which is about 67%. We have basically our utility customers, which is like NRG. 2 tiers is Bell County and Dow. We have some other groups there too. Proposed revenues, we're asking $42 million from our customers, system rate customers. And here are the other buckets that we talked about, Sugar Land, and the grants, and lake permits and stuff that we get rather than, as well as cost reimbursable. Now, cost reimbursable are our customers for our waste treatment plants such as Temple Belton. We also have Williamson County Rural Water Line in that. And later on, I'll show you that the expenses are offset to that. So every dollar of expense that we have with these customers, we bill back dollar for dollar. This just takes a look at the rates, the changes. Agricultural is 70% of the system rate. These other rates for 2 tiers and the other groups are average rates, and most of them are set by CPI indexes that come out later this year. So these rates will change as the year goes through and do not require board approval except for one rate, which is when the 2-tier rate. So these are the expenses we have that we talked about earlier, about a 5% increase for employees, 4 positions being added. Also in the numbers, in the O&M expenses is for the Army Corps of Engineers, is $4.6 million that we have projected for next year, which is about $9 an acre foot in the system rate. The money is spent, our prorated rates to maintain those lakes as well. Operating expenses, we've already talked all the expenses here. Cost reimbursable is an offset, 16.5. Here are the operating projects, which cover things from studies to assessments. So let's talk about capital projects. And we're planning on spending about $49 million for next year. This just shows you the kind of what those projects in the different groups are. In detail, obviously, Allen's Creek, we will start our permitting next year. That's one of the larger expenses. We haven't mentioned, but in the Lake Limestone, we're replacing the Tainer gates. We have 2 projects out here for Williams County Regional Rural Water Line. Basically the phase 3 pumps and the ion generators. That will be reimbursed by the customers, and it's not included. It's included in the 49, but won't be spent. I know this is a busy slide, but it really shows that we'll be spending around $362 million in the next 5 years. So we'll be borrowing money. And I've built the rates about this modeling as well as further out in the next 20 years. So let's look at the 5-year plan. And again, I'm going to have to start, I'm going to have to use the basically rate stabilization reserve here basically in 24, and that just keeps it down to the $93 an acre foot. We'll start borrowing money next year. And I'm trying to maintain our working capital in the $25 to $30 million range. So here again is the rates. And this is also a balancing act that we have to do to maintain coverage. And a smooth incline, and keep it in the 5 to 6% range. Any questions?
So a few years ago, we used to do this presentation, and just the finance part of it took about an hour and a half, and we used to go through line items, and what you see is you see a bunch of folks out trying to stay awake. So here's what I have to offer you. We're going to put these slides on our webpage. If you would like a copy of our proposed draft budget, we'll send it to you. And if each of you as an entity want to ask questions, we'll answer questions today, but if you want to go through that draft budget and ask us questions about what's in our capital improvements and what's in our different revenues and how we build our budgets, we'd be more than willing to get on the phone with you or come see you and talk through this budget stuff and really answer any questions that you have. So, however you want to do it. And again, we're not opposed to taking questions today, but it's a lot of high-level information, especially from the project standpoint. It's really hard for you to boil down into all the nuts and bolts. But we want you to have that opportunity. We'll take this to our board the last Monday of July and ask for their consideration for our next fiscal year, and our next fiscal year starts on September the 1st. So, any questions about anything that you've heard today? Okay, y'all are an easy crowd. Just real quick, I do want to thank the city of Round Rock, all of y'all, for letting us be here and use your new facilities. First class, really nice. Thank y'all very, very much. And then, yeah, thank you. And then also, I just want to introduce you to some folks that are really critical in our management of the water. The Brazos River is probably one of the most unique river systems in the country, from the standpoint that probably all of the water is really allocated. You're not going to find many river systems that are almost 100% allocated. You're also not, unless you look in Texas, you also won't find rivers that start in a desert. Most rivers start in mountains where you get snow melt and you have a reliable source of water, and rivers in Texas don't have that. So the point of that is to let you know that we have a water master, and they do an outstanding job working for the people of the state of Texas, the Brazos River Authority, and your water interest. And I want to introduce you to them. Molly Muller's here, and then Nancy Ragland is here. So if you have questions about the Water Master and that program, get their business card and visit with them. And our folks are talking with them on a weekly basis, and again, they are instrumental in making sure, especially with drought, that our water's protected. And since we've had the Water Master program, it's rained nonstop, Molly, so I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to get y'all to beat up on her or anything. So, and then also, about half or more of our water stored behind Corps of Engineer reservoirs. And we have an outstanding relationship and really appreciate what the Corps does, especially here in Williamson County with Granger and Lake Georgetown, and then up into Bell County. So I want to introduce the guys from the Corps that are over here too. Brad Dempsey is here, Tim Horn, Michael Champagne, Scott Blank, and Bradley Ellis. So introduce yourself to those guys. If you have questions about operations, and I'll tell you, in Georgetown and Round Rock know this, as soon as Georgetown fills up and gets in the flood, we start calling them all the time, hey, hold that water, slow that water, and they really work on your behalf to make sure that water's maintained and the releases are slowed, and they just do a heck of a job. So anyway, all right, what's the plans for lunch?
We're gonna go out the store, we're gonna turn right. We're gonna turn right in the first hallway, and then it's down here, and then you can come back in through that door, come back in and eat.
Okay, thank y'all very much for coming.